Thank you, sir, for those insights. And now I would like to invite Mr. Hari Om Rai, Chairman and MD of Lava, for his keynote session on a key to unlock India's potential. Mr. Rai demonstrated his leadership instincts from the beginning as he became the president of the Students' Union of his college in Delhi University. Lava was founded in 2009 along with hundreds of other Indian companies, but today Lava is the number one domestic company with more than 60% share amongst the domestic companies in the mobile phone market. Lava operates in more than 20 countries outside of India. The company achieved a turnover of about $1.2 billion with over 15,000 people. For this keynote, over to you, Mr. Rai.
Good morning to all, and thank you, Cyber Media, for giving me this opportunity. When I was told to speak on, what is going to happen in electronics manufacturing in India, I thought that let me speak on the subject, holistically, how India is going to progress from poverty to wealth. Because if we understand the fundamentals, things become very simple. And I think whatever has been presented in this presentation, in my mind, if we can deploy that into any other sector, it is going to work similarly. But right now, I'm going to speak in context of electronics. So what is the big picture? Let's understand first. So Bharat, 5,000 years of economic dominance from till 18th century, from 300 BC till about 18th century, for 5,000 years, we were 25% of the global GDP. When the Britishers came, they brought the GDP down, and when they left us in 1947 with 3.9% of the global GDP. What we have done in the last 75 odd years has brought us further down to 3.1% of the global GDP. So first and the most important thing for us is to understand that whatever we have done with the country, it has not served us well. Let us also look at it from the different context. We were really, really left behind when the whole of Asia also kept progressing. We were almost similar in 1960s. The per capita income, look at Japan, Korea, Taiwan, China, and India. Almost similar. Japan was a little ahead, but almost similar. But look at what has happened to us and where we are. So something happened here, because of which we have not been able to progress. Let's try to unlock as to why it has happened. So to unlock that, let's understand the process of growth. Finally, whether it is a family or a company or a country, finally, when you are at a low level of stage, or the issue is in the knowledge and skills, that's all, whether it's an individual or a family or a country. So stage one for a developing country, that it lacks knowledge and skills. So what needs to be done? That you have to deploy your people in the agriculture and in the manufacturing, because it has the most use of limited productive skills. It is also called the volume deployment of workforce. So we know that we have not been able to actually kickstart the manufacturing in a greater manner. And then what we do is, after there is a second stage, which is the value creation stage, that you keep the money targeted for fastest technological learning, which means what you need to do is to radically restructure the agriculture and also, acquire higher level of skills and technology in the manufacturing domain. So, to give you a context, India is 1.6 times India has land than China. Yet China's production is double to that of India. We have 160 million hectares, and China has about 104 million hectares, which means that 1.6 times land, but the China production is double. So opportunity for us is to produce more. But why we don't produce more, and if we'll produce more, what will happen? I'll take you through that point later. But we have to understand that the opportunity of country and why we were 25%, because God has given us everything, whatever is required to be given. So let's understand the post-nuclearization. Before that, before the world became nuclear, the countries used to have, make colonies. But after the nuclear situation happens, there is a new world order, how to make colonies and how to ensure that the richer countries are getting richer. The fundamental is the economy, whether, in the colony period also, economy is at the heart of government agenda, because whatever government requires to do, whether it is to build the social and physical infrastructure, so your health, roads, electricity, etc., or you have to build your defense and security, or you have to redistribute the money from the rich to the poor. For all three, you require money. And for that, economy is at the heart. And to do that, what you do is you build businesses to take share from the global pie. That's what the world has done. What is the process? We have to understand that nations are rich only if their companies are rich. That's the only process of growth. How to build the companies? Only large companies can compete on the global scale. So winner takes all is the principle. We know that. So how to build those companies? First is the nurture, that you protect and support the infant industries. Then you enable them to attain scale to compete globally. And this has become the new military system of the developed world for making colonies. So the only process of building a robust economy is champions. Let's understand how the champion companies are there. This is how. So first of all, it's a top-down. Champion companies means very, very large companies, because once you have, for example, let's say in China, I've seen factories employing 1 million people in just one factory. If you have 1 million people in just factory, you have, giant companies supporting you, maybe companies employing 500,000 people. And then to support the giant companies, you have large company deploying 100,000 people. To support these large companies, you have MSME companies. And to support these MSME companies, you have very small companies to support that. And that's how you create the ecosystem. So let me again touch upon the point which I mentioned at the beginning, that once you have such a large ecosystem, even if, for example, when I go to China, I see hundreds of restaurants in a row, and each restaurant is really, really running well. Why it is running well? Because there's so much of ecosystem, working, and, there are so many people earning a lot of money. They are going to all the restaurants, and, and the consumption is at a very, very high level. Whereas in India, I see at certain places there are 5, 10, 20 restaurants, and suddenly, you will see restaurants going bad, etc. Because the fundamentals are that, we don't have very large economy built on the basis of manufacturing. So what does this ecosystem does is that it becomes globally competitive manufacturing and service ecosystem, employing millions of people. What does it do? It starts doing exports. The whole focus is how can you take share from the global GDP? And to take share from the global GDP is that you focus on exports, whether these are goods or services, you have to export that and get the export surplus, because that export surplus multiplies in the economy as economic multiplier. So when you have a very large ecosystem, then the kind of farm production you consume, whatever the farmers produce, you consume, and the farmers become very wealthy. Today, if we will produce so much, and in sometimes I see farmer produce, they have to leave their, farm production at the farms itself, because there's no taker, because we don't have a large economy. So when that happens, when the farmer become very wealthy, they start, creating demand for manufacturing goods and services. So that's how you create the, a virtuous cycle in the economy for that. What is the impact of domestic champions in economy? Let me just take you through the numbers of Fortune 500 companies. What is the revenue of the Fortune 500 companies for the global GDP? Top 500 companies produce 40% of the revenue in the global GDP and their ecosystem. Taiwan, 8 companies are there, produce 73%. Of these 500 companies, in Taiwan, 8 companies are there. They produce 73% of Taiwanese GDP. In France, 26 companies, they produce 69% of French GDP. China, 135 companies, producing 56% of Chinese GDP. Korea, 15 companies, 51% of Korean GDP. Germany, 27 companies, 51% of German GDP. USA, 122 companies, 47%. of a giant US GDP of more than $20 trillion. So, and India is just about 7 companies, creating 13% of Indian GDP, out of which 4 are, the government firms, the public sector firms. So we have a very small, piddly economy, and of that economy, only 13% is contributed by the 7 companies. So this is the US versus China. In 1996, China had only 1 company in the Fortune 500 list. Today, China has 135 companies. It has surpassed US, and US has only 121 companies. This is how China has grown, by making the Fortune 500 companies or champion companies. And this is the percentage share. China's share is about 56% of their GDP of these top companies, 135 companies, and US has 44% of these 121 companies. So we have to understand why it has happened, how it has happened. The developed world deploys only 3 inputs for building champions. Number 1, utilizing the domestic market to build champions. This is number 1. Number 2, the banks. The banks followed completely development agenda through the monetary policies. And number 3 was the fiscal inputs through budgetary mechanisms. These are the 3 mechanisms the world has followed. Let me just elaborate that. So every country today advocating free market followed protectionism and champion policies to create world-beating firms. Let me elaborate that further. In 16th century, Britain did the same, taxed export of raw wool and import of clothing to nurture export-oriented wool and textile industry. 17th century, France followed similar policies as Britain. 18th century Prussia from Frederick the Great, all interventionist policies were followed. 19th century USA, the first Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, was dubbed as, in the USA, mother of all protectionism. Then 19th century unified Germany refined and expanded the policies of Europe. And then 20th century Japan learned from German protectionism, followed by Korea, Taiwan, and China. This is how the world has moved forward on the protection side. On the monetary policy side, what are the monetary policy during the development? The bank follow the development agenda. There is low return for citizens when the development agenda is being followed in the bank. When they keep money, maybe 1%, 2% less return is there, but the entire money is focused towards the development agenda. A rediscounting of loans following the development agenda, and also export is the key criteria. What are the fiscal policies during development? The government build necessary infrastructure to create global scale. They incentivize domestic companies to create R&D, supply chain, and manufacturing skills, and subsidize and incentivize to create global competitiveness. These are the 3 important elements on the fiscal policy also. What are the outcome of the policies? That high employment rate, acquisition of technology and skills, creation of world-beating firms, multifold rise in exports, long-term financial and technological independence, virtuous cycle of demand, and finally, migration from poverty to wealth. So first of all, I think what we need to do is to acknowledge failure first, and then start further. What has happened? Our mistake was that we opened our economy prematurely. We think that in 1991, we have done a great job. But what happened? The money came into the country, but it never made the country people productive. It went into the consumer lending. It went into speculation of secondary market or speculation of land, but it never made the country productive. So this is a huge, the economists, they studied the policy which were being followed in the developed world, and they forgot to see what the developed world did when they were in the developing stage. They completely forgot, and that's what is the big problem of the country. Having said that, this is the best time to take a leap, and this is the big picture. Let's understand that. On the electronics IT, this electronics and tech create the most value in the world. This is the value of the global market. So in the total valuation, $15.5 trillion valuation is created by is the market cap of the tech industry, which is about 17-18% of the total market cap, global market cap, of about $85 trillion. So if you see from the GDP perspective also, about similar contribution with the economic multiplier we have from the electronics and tech industries. Because the revenue is $4 trillion, which multiplies at least about 4 times to add value to the remaining GDP. So roughly $16 trillion is what is the value addition of electronics and IT in GDP also. And the electronic industry revenue is about $3 trillion. And therefore, electronics and tech is the most valuable sector in the whole world. And the contribution of this sector is also growing in the rest of the businesses, because whether it is agriculture or you do any business, textile, your machinery, everything, the electronics and tech is now being used everywhere. And today, we are very clear that the world is looking at the alternates to manufacture, the alternates of China, because the population is aging now, the per capita income is rising, the job opportunities are there for people beyond manufacturing. They don't want to work for manufacturing. For example, a guy who's working in the mall, getting about 75,000 rupees equivalent. He's working in a factory getting 60,000 rupees equivalent or 55,000 rupees equivalent, and it's a cumbersome job. Nobody wants to work for manufacturing in China. Therefore, the wages have risen in the last 10 years, tripled. And the world is thinking that you are over depending on one country. You have to go in and do a different supply chain. And the geopolitical compulsions are there. And therefore, the entire world is looking at China plus one. India, there's no doubt, is the best answer because of young, unemployed, large population, second largest English-speaking people in the world. This country is the technology center for most companies. Software is the key, and we are doing software for such a long time. We have low-cost IT services. Again, software is key for electronics, and we are doing it for a very, very long time. Low wages are there in the country because of lower per capita income. And this large population, despite we are a small market, we are not a large market, but this large population is going to become a very large market with the GDP growth. And therefore, it is the best for any company, any world's company, to manufacture in India in the same manner how they have gone and manufactured in China for 30, 35 years. So because the market access you get through local manufacturing. For example, in Vietnam, if you manufacture, it's at 8 to 9% of the Indian market, Indian population. And therefore, once you manufacture in India, you get a very large market eventually to manufacture and supply to the same market. So what is the vision and strategy we have? Let's see this from this perspective, that India population is we are 18% of the global population, yet surviving on a mere 3.1% of the global GDP, which means that we have to take our fair share from the global GDP. And to do that, we have to export our goods and services. And because of that, look at the journey of electronics. In the national policy of electronics, we want to take the electronics from $70 billion, which we manufactured in 2020, to $300 billion by 2026. And this is the target. 70 billion we have produced in the 2020, out of which about 11 billion we have exported, and 59 billion was the domestic market. And we want to go now from 2020 to 2026, $300 billion of total production, out of which 180 billion local consumption and export of about 120 billion. So what are the established economic principles? Is a very fundamental principle that the winner takes all, and because of which business eventually consolidates in the hands of very, very few players due to economies of scale. The same principle is equally valid for countries as well. Only handful of companies are going to supply to the rest. And therefore, what is the goal we have taken in the electronics industry? That India must take 50% share of the global consumption of electronics by 2032. There'll not be, only limited companies are going to supply to the rest of the world. So build 50% globally competitive value chain in India by 2032, at least in the next 10 years. This is what the target we are taking as an industry, and also working with the government on the same target, and ensure that remaining 50% manufacturing in the world cannot be competitive without using India's competitive value chain, which we are producing in India. That's the goal which we are taking. So what are the strategic imperatives for that? That the entire strategy is export-oriented strategy. And in the bargain, we'll also supply to our domestic economy. So to do that, what we need is to build globally competitive supply chain and design ecosystem in India. How can it be built? By creating economies of scale. How economies of scale can be created? By attracting global GVCs, global value chains, to create and to manufacture at scale. And in order to attract them, what we need to do is to mitigate disabilities. And for that, the PLI scheme has been created, as you know that. And the most important is to build Indian champions for long-term technological and financial independence of the country. So strategy deployed in the electronic sector, mobile phone is at the core of electronics, because once you build mobile phones, you can build anything. Why? Because mobile phone, whether it is electrical design, mechanical design, it is in microns. If you produce mobile phone, you can produce anything, on the industrial mechanical design part, on the hardware part, because every single product of hardware which is used anywhere else, it is used in the mobile phones. Similarly, whether it's in the software also is equally same. And also, it connects with the rest of the electronics, and also it has highest revenue. So once we are able to build an infrastructure of mobile phones, anything can be built in India. So this is the process of growth and dominance. Once we understand how the mobile phone business is going to happen. So you acquire skills and technology at the beginning. Once you acquire the skills and technology, if you have scale, economies of scale at lower per capita, your output becomes very, very competitive. That's how the entire world has progressed. So at 17% of Chinese per capita, India's output would be most competitive globally once we are able to create economies of scale. This is fundamental principle. So this is the visionary PLI scheme, as you know, that we have brought, to create economies of scale, global champions and their value chains to start the ecosystem, and Indian champions, a separate scheme, so that we are able to, deepen the skills inside India, deepen the value chain inside India for long-term technological and financial independence. So this is up till now, this is the strategy, whatever we've done here, but it is not good enough because there are facts leading to challenges. When you see the Chinese companies are consistently gaining the market share, and China holds the largest share of the mobile phone value chain. Let's see how the mobile phone value chain is. 3.5% value chain of the mobile phone is in Europe. 10 to 15% is in US, depending upon which segment you're talking about. Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, about 35 to 45%, and 40 to 50% value chain is in China. So that's the scenario today. And how the market share, this is the fact 3, that the market share movement of foreign versus Indian companies and how it has happened. This is the foreign companies. Today, they occupy 90.8% share of the mobile phone market in India. This is how the Indian companies have gone, 9.2% volume market share. Value market share should be less than 2%. And here, in Indian companies were 44% of the market in 2015. They have come down to about 9.2% market today. And the Chinese companies have grown to become 63% of the volume market of Indian companies. These are the 3 facts which are actually challenges for us to build. And this is the situation. The top segment of India, because Apple is coming and going to manufacture at a very, very large scale. Therefore, this segment is covered through Apple, but they have a very large Chinese supply chain. And we are, unfortunately not giving, Apple, I think, an open this thing to bring their Chinese supply chain and manufacture in India because of some geopolitical issues. So this is the challenge we have. Samsung has also started exporting, but it's on a losing spree. We have seen the last chart. And Chinese companies command the largest market share in the value chain today in the whole world and also in India. And they are sort of not bringing their value chains in India. That's the issue we have. And Indian companies, as we've seen, are being throttled through capital burn and supply chain cartel of the Chinese companies. That's what has happened in the past. So what is the way forward? It is very clear for us that what is the holistic strategy? This is the last slide for India's technological and financial independence. That we need to change the mindset first. And we have to understand that the biggest business of the country is the government. This is the biggest company of the country is the government. And therefore, government has to think that they are fully responsible for building the globally competitive ecosystems and the firms. The firms belong to the government, actually. That's the process. And to do that, you have to change the measurement system, to change the behavior and change the mindset of people working in the government so that they believe that their companies are theirs and they have to build the companies to create finally, to change the country from, to migrate the country from poverty to wealth. Secondly, the Chinese companies and their supply chains, when they're coming, they must follow the development agenda. But once they are following the development agenda, they must be given green carpet for those companies who are bringing skills and fully aligned to follow the development agenda, for example, to exports from here. Because the Taiwanese companies and Japanese companies who were the biggest enemy of China, they went to China because they utilized the low per capita of China and their human resource, and exported from China to the world. So that is also, we must follow that, because our per capita is low. Once we'll be able to create skills, we'll be the most competitive. So any company who is utilizing the India's labor and exporting out of India must be supported, whether it is Chinese or any other company. Last, the fiscal policies. We have to create economies of scale through incentives and subsidies. We have to create a roadmap for globally competitive supply chain, for creation of globally competitive supply chain in India. And we have to utilize the domestic market also. That's what the world has done. For Indian companies to build scale, we have to give them exclusive market access of 20%, roughly 20% of the market, to enable scale for creating Indian champions, global Indian champions. This action itself will build the globally competitive supply chain in India in a very, very big way. And the last one is the monetary inputs. As I've already discussed, that banking must follow the development agenda. Banks to have targets to build Indian champions. They should not just go for lending and speculation, etc. They have to follow the development agenda. They have to get targets to build globally competitive financial cost by subsidizing the cost of companies, following the development agenda. So thank you very much. This is what I have to say. Thank you.